that word until. People read this and it kind of just slides over and then you don't realize the import of that. This declaration of war is not about a particular battle. It's a permanent war until Islam dominates the world. That's what it says. And then this is confirmed by all of the Islamic religious authorities as well. Now look at number 5. It says, fight against those to whom the scriptures were given, which is a reference to Jews and Christians, until they pay tribute out of hand and are utterly subdued. So here's a declaration of war specifically against Christians and Jews. Not a particular battle, but it's a war until they are subdued. In other words, Christians and Jews are theoretically permitted to live under Muslim subjugation, but they must be subjugated first. And any Christian or Jew who doesn't want to be subjugated, off with his head. Let's see what Muhammad has to say about this. Remember, Muhammad is considered the most excellent example for all Muslims to follow because the Quran says so. By the way, does everybody know that the Quran is considered to be the literal word of the Muslim God? The literal word, not the inspired word, and it makes a huge difference. The literal word means that it cannot be interpreted. If it says something, well, that's what it says, and it's supposed to be read literally. And so when it says to make war on non-Muslims, well, that's what their God is telling them to do. There's no way that you could reinterpret that some other way to make it mean something that it doesn't say. And so what does Muhammad say? Again, Muhammad is considered the obligatory, most excellent example for all Muslims to follow. Look at the second column, the right-hand column, page 4. Muhammad said, I have been ordered to fight with the people until they say, none has the right to be worshipped but Allah. Notice the word till again. It's a permanent declaration of war, and that is what their prophet is commanding Muslims to do. By the way, even moderate Muslims like Dr. Jasser will never, ever criticize anything in the Quran or in these statements by Muhammad. He won't do it, because if he did that, he would lose his legitimacy to consider himself a devout Muslim or a Muslim at all. No Muslim is allowed ever to criticize anything in the Quran or Muhammad, and that includes Dr. Jasser. I've had experience with Dr. Jasser. I've debated him many times over the years, corresponded with him, and it's very clear he will never criticize anything in the Quran. It must have been about 8 years ago or 9 years ago, I was in a debate with him in front of about 90 people, and I presented him with some of these statements from the Quran that you have in front of you, and I asked him, Zudi, what do you think about these passages in the Quran? And he kind of flustered and said, well, you have to see them in context. And I said, all right, show me the context that changes the meaning of these passages. And of course, he couldn't do it. He became kind of flustered. He says, well, we moderate Muslims have to do something about these toxic verses in the Quran. And I said, toxic verses in the Quran? That's Allah's literal word you're talking about. If you ever said anything like that in a Muslim country, you'd be lucky to get out with your head still on. He has no answer to that. So that's why he doesn't talk about these passages in the Quran. He can't do it. There is no other interpretation of them. They are to be read literally. Here's the second one that Muhammad said. Muhammad said, fight in the name of Allah and in the way of Allah. Fight against those who disbelieve in Allah. Make a holy war. Well, that's what jihad is. Jihad is holy war. If you look at the little box in the middle here, this is from the most popular manual of Sharia law, which I mentioned before. They define jihad just exactly the way it's in the box. It says, quote, jihad means to war against non-Muslims. That is in the words of the highest Islamic religious authorities in the world. They tell us that. Again, everything we talk about Islam here comes from the Islamic religious authorities. And so also look at the box then, if you would, at the bottom, that Islam is not just a religion, and this is what you need to get across to other people, that Islam is, in fact, a totalitarian and an imperialist ideology. And it says here, in sharp contrast to Christianity, Judaism, and other religions, Islam is not merely a religion. Rather, Islam is a unique and comprehensive ideology. So there you have it in the words of the Islamic religious authorities, that Islam is not just a religion. And this is the point that you need to get across when you talk to other people. It is not just a religion. Now, it's an imperialist and a totalitarian ideology. There are certain things that follow logically from that. If Islam is not just a religion like other religions, what is a mosque? Well, a mosque then is not just a house of prayer like in other religions, or even just a community center. So what is it? A mosque becomes the propagation center for that totalitarian ideology. Sort of like a Nazi party headquarters or a Communist party headquarters. It's a propagation center for the ideology. And again, I have quotations from the Islamic religious authorities which tell us just that. I'm not making this up. Also, logic. Follow the logic. If Islam is totalitarian and a religious Muslim, of course, many times a day, pledges allegiance to Islam, to Allah, and to Muhammad, what does that say about loyalty? Well, if you are loyal to a totalitarian system, you cannot be loyal to anything else. It's logical. And so Muslims, if they are religious, cannot be loyal to America or any other non-Muslim system. I'm not making that up. I can give you quotations from the highest Islamic religious authorities in the United States, which tell us precisely that. They say there's an irreconcilable contradiction. Excuse me, is there a problem over there? There's an irreconcilable contradiction between loyalty to Islam and loyalty to America. They tell us that. Again, we always have to consider what they are telling us about their own religion. Okay, and one of the statements comes from the Council on American Islamic Relations. By the way, look at the name of the Council on American Islamic Relations. They're setting up a dichotomy between Islam and America. And they're supposed to have relations with one another. In other words, Muslims cannot really be part of America in terms of values. They can have American passports, but they can't share American values because they have their own Islamic values. And that's a totalitarian system which takes in everything. You're not allowed to have other values than Islamic values. And so here's a statement from one of the leaders of the Council on American Islamic Relations, number 5 here. It says, if we are practicing Muslims, we are above the law of the land. Well, that says something about their loyalty. And there are other statements from Islamic religious authorities in the same vein. Jihad, you already know. Jihad means to war against non-Muslims, and as you know, war is conducted in different ways. It's not only on the battlefield. There's disinformation, there's economic war, there's propaganda, you name it. There's all kinds of ways of conducting war against the enemy. And so jihad is the same way. And you, on page 3, you've got that diagram where the ones in the middle are conducting jihad in a way which is not necessarily overtly violent, at least not yet. So that is what is going on with jihad. The violent jihad is the tip of the iceberg. It's all the jihad that's going on in the middle of the triangle that is essentially not visible to us unless you know what to look for. So Islam then is a religion plus a totalitarian ideology. You could call it an ideological wolf in sheep's religious clothing. Use those expressions. Feel free to use them when you talk to other people. Now on page 2, we talked about this is the third existential threat to the United States, and it comes from the Muslim Brotherhood, which has organized practically all of the mosques and the Islamic centers in the United States. It's part of their program to use those centers to activate the Muslim community to pursue Islamic dominance and superiority. The credo on page 2 now of the Muslim Brotherhood, and it has been for the last since 1928, about 90 years. Allah is our goal, Muhammad is our leader, the jihad is our way, and dying for Allah is our highest hope. So any of our leaders who tell you that Muslim Brotherhood is not a religious organization and not an extremist organization, they're lying to you. By the way, the word extremism, let me digress for one moment. What is extremism? I remember speaking to the imam in Tempe a number of years ago. They had an open house for non-Muslims to come in there. And then after the open house, I went up to the imam there, and I asked him, what do you think about Dr. Jasser? And in kind of a low voice, he says, Dr. Jasser is an extremist. I said, what? How can that be? We all think of Dr. Jasser as a moderate. But the imam was right. Extremism refers to some sort of a starting point. Extreme compared to something. An extremist compared to the social values around that person. In Islam, Dr. Jasser is an extremist because he deviates from Islamic values. He's a moderate in our eyes because he's closer, his values are closer to our values. So in Islamic eyes, he's an extremist, and he has been ostracized from the Islamic community because of that. We need to keep that in mind. So now back to the Muslim Brotherhood, back on page 2. They have a program for America, and this comes from a document which was seized by the FBI about 11 years ago, 12 years ago, and the document comes from their own sources, and we need to take that seriously. Let's read that together. It says, here's their program for America. It says, the process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process with all that the word means. The Muslim Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad, well, you know what that is, in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house, that is our house, by their hands, that's the hands of the non-Muslims, and the hands of the believers, so that Western civilization, is eliminated and God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. That's again the imperialist drive of Islam, that Islam must strive for dominance. And that's what they are doing here in America with all of their front groups, led by the Council on American Islamic Relations. Though notice, it says the process of settlement. What does that mean? That means Muslim immigration. So they are pushing Muslim immigration, unlimited, precisely in order to conduct the jihad against America. And notice, it says they're doing that by their hands. Whose hands are they talking about? It's your hands. The hands of the non-Muslims. The non-Muslims who are bringing the Muslims into positions of policy-making influence. For example, I mentioned the San Diego School District. These are non-Muslims. All of these trustees over there, they're working with the Council on American Islamic Relations. They have the biggest idea what they're doing. So the Council on American Islamic Relations is using their hands, that is the non-Muslim hands of the school administrators, to bring Islam into the schools. The folks at the City University of New York invited this Muslim extremist, we call him extremist, in fact she's simply following Islamic values, to be the commencement speaker. It's the non-Muslims who invited her and who are supporting her. This is happening all over. Just this week in the Pentagon, even under President Trump, who doesn't quite get it yet, in the Pentagon, they are firing a person by the name of Dunleavy who has been conducting courses in military college, I believe in the Air Force Military College, to train them about Islam. And the Council on American Islamic Relations feels that there are comments and elements in his instruction which offend Muslims. And he's getting fired because of that. By whom? He's getting fired by non-Muslims in the Defense Department at the will of the Muslims. That's using our hands to get Muslims into power and eventually to make Islam supreme and victorious over all other religions, just like it says here. Furthermore, let's continue this last paragraph and then we can go over to questions. And it says here, this general strategic goal of the group, that is the Muslim Brotherhood, in America, is establishing an effective and stable Islamic movement, not to help make them American citizens, but a movement led by the Muslim Brotherhood which adopts Muslims' causes, domestically and globally, and which works to expand the observant Muslim base, in other words, to get people from the bottom of the triangle into the middle of the triangle. That is their goal. And it aims at unifying and directing Muslims' efforts, presents Islam as a civilization alternative, and supports the global Islamic State wherever it is. Well, that means like ISIS, for example, wherever it is. And it goes on to say here, these are all from the documents of the Muslim Brotherhood, the role of the Islamic Center in every city should be the same as the mosque's role during the time of the Prophet. And the mosque's role during the time of the Prophet, and this comes from the Islamic religious authorities, is a propagation center for the ideology of Islam. So I think you get the idea now, what Islam is all about. I urge you to learn more about it. Take these sheets home with you, look them over again, read the quotations from the Quran that we didn't have time to read today. And send me an email, if you like. Be on my email distribution list for articles about Islam. And that will help you when you talk to other people, our fellow citizens. You've got to do that. If you don't do that, nobody will. And please use whatever influence you have on the Arizona Republican Party. Get them to support the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act. That is the most important piece of legislation facing both houses of Congress. And at the moment, neither of our senators support it. They, in fact, support the Muslim Brotherhood. Some of the representatives support it. Trent Franks is on the other end of the city, on my end of the city. He supports the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act. Who is your congressman here?
Kirsten
Oh,
Cinema.
we don't even want to talk about
Kirsten Cinema. Comrade Cinema.
Cinema. Oh, God. She is a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, everywhere you talk to, tell people that she is a supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood, and now you know something about the Muslim Brotherhood. Tell the people you talk to how dangerous that is. And also write to her. You're her constituents, even if you don't share her views, but write to her anyway. Tell her you've got all of these people who want her to support the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act. That's probably the single most important thing you can do, is to agitate for supporting the Muslim Brotherhood Terrorist Designation Act.